Welcome to Bloody Shed Lounge.
Welcome to Bloody Shed Lounge. We're happy to be here this evening.
And this is Charles.
This is Michelle.
And we're going to talk about some interesting stuff. We're going to talk about Pez dispensers, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The whole podcast is about Pez
Totally about
dispensers.
Pez.
No, you
about
know what?
Marie Antoinette, because, the throat. No, I said it right. I said Marie.
Did you say Marie?
No, I said Mary
Did you
earlier,
say Mary?
and you corrected me.
Right.
So I said it correctly this time.
Perfect. You know what I was thinking about at 5 a.m. this morning when I couldn't sleep? I don't know what our topic is today.
That's the devil's work.
It is.
Totally. Yeah, how would you describe? I think it's like some sort of whirlwind history of Satanism.
I mean, is it
culture?
Satanic Panic, or is it Satanism, or is it black magic, occult, golden?
It's mostly
dawn.
Satanism and history.
We'll call it Bitches Brew.
Bitches Brew? No, that's a beer. That's a beer.
Oh, okay.
Remember, we were going to name a beer after that.
Yeah. Oh, I should make a beer, a Bloody Shed Lounge beer.
Oh, we should. Totally. There we go.
That
All
idea.
right, something to brew.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this was something that you should have known better. There's history in this. I went and did a whole shit ton of research on this, and you're going to have to jump in and keep me from turning into Mr. O'Meara.
Who's that?
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask.
Is that the guy from Karate Kid?
No, that was my history teacher in high school, and he talked so much. He was a good teacher, but he talked so much that like little white spittle formed in the corners of his mouth.
I know people like that. I don't like it.
We never, could bring ourselves to
say anything or just walk up and rub the schmeg off of him.
Schmeg? Please no.
Schmegula.
No, God, that's
what it's called. The technical
you're
term
thinking
for
of something down lower.
Oh, is that what that is?
Smegma.
Ew. I don't like this topic.
Totally not what we're supposed to be talking about.
We want to thank you for joining us for Bloody Shed Lounge. Please visit our website, which is bloodyshed.com. And please like us everywhere that you find podcasts.
Yeah, anywhere. Twitter,
if you're listening
whatever.
Now, please like us. It really is helpful to us.
Awesome.
Let's get going. So our topic that we're not quite sure of today involves Satanism and Pez dispensers and bizarre cult movies from the 1960s and 70s and Jane Mansfield. And we've got a little bit of everything, even Frank Zappa for you.
Oh, yay. I love Frank Zappa. Yeah. You know what? I totally have a crush on Moon Unit, but that's a different... Yeah, okay.
She's a super cutie.
Yeah. So I guess to kind of start it off, I mean, the history of it is like, it's kind of interesting to know where this all started to influence culture so much because it's kind of integral to it, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a whole problem with Satan. Everyone has a visual, the horns and everything and this evil thing, but there's one problem with that. That's not how he started. Satan wasn't evil. He wasn't what we think. He wasn't even a specific character. He didn't even exist in the Old Testament and rarely pops up in the New Testament. And if he does, it's kind of this vague idea of an entity. I mean, literally, he started out, the word was Satan with an M at the end, and it just was a verb.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it totally just meant to attack or to hate on somebody,
really?
Right? Yeah. Like this dude totally satammed me when I walked out of the bar.
I satam reggae.
Yeah, you satam.
I actually don't get me wrong, I love reggae, but there's something that it creates a reaction in me. Yeah, like almost like a chemical reaction. It's the satam. Okay, I'm sorry, go on.
So the next variation, of course, is to the word we know, where they got rid of that M, and now you had a word, it's still a verb, that meant to persecute, to pursue somebody. I'm being sataned by the IRS, those motherfuckers.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not really.
No, let's not mention them ever again. We'll just pull out IRS and use Kardashians.
Oh, okay. Kardashians. I am totally being sataned by the Kardashians.
No, you satam the Kardashians.
Oh, yeah, I do. Totally.
They don't know you exist. Sorry to say.
So, and by the way, this is all totally neutral, right? Good guys, bad guys, they all sataned. And yeah, I'm totally saying it, though, the way they said it back then. Yeah. So, of course, the next stop is becoming a noun, right? And then it meant obstacle, prosecutor, attacker, or literally just roadblock. And there's stories in the Bible that, the Satan is in your path. God liked to send down messengers, which in Greek was angelos, right? There's where you get angels. And so they would send them down, if you're riding your talking donkey down the road and
talking donkey?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, that's that's an actual story from the Bible. We won't get into it.
Oh, I thought that was just a Shrek thing.
No. He was riding a talking donkey, and he was going to go. The king paid him to go make fun of the Israelites to curse him, and God sent an angel down, and he hit his donkey because his donkey wouldn't cross the road. So the donkey said, "Well, what the fuck, dude? Like, I'm trying to save your life."
Said.
Totally, in a religious, non-cursy way.
Yeah.
Right. And so, like the angel said, well, if you'd crossed your path, I would have turned you into like a shish kebab or something, so.
This doesn't, I'm not, okay, I'm following you, but
it is a Bible scripture as translated in the modern day.
This is Charlesism.
Right.
I got it.
So anyway, that becomes like the first real instance that now Satan kind of being perceived as an entity. From there, there's a Greek translation because Greek around 200 BCE, before Common Era, because we're not supposed to say before Christ anymore, I guess.
We're not? I didn't know that.
No. If you ever go into museums, it's BCE and CE, Common Era, because BC was before Christ, AD is Anno Domini.
Yeah. When did that change?
I don't know, when scientists decided maybe we better not be so religious.
That's interesting, though, because that's a lot of work to change all of those signs.
No, they're just little signs in a museum.
It seems like a lot of work.
I think just put a little sticker over it and put,
All right.
Oh, anyway. So the Greeks, they made a translation because, 200 BC, they were the standard, they were the global English of their day in the region, right? And so they started taking a little poetic license, and they were writing this version. It's called the Septuagint, and it's just called that because it was like Sept 70 people translated this. And they took a little liberty, poetic license, and started making this entity of Satan a little more conscious, I guess you could say.
Okay.
And just as an aside, so in the translation of, roadblock, obstacle, well, the word that translates to in Greek was diabolos. Right? So now you get diablo, diabolical, and later devil.
Right.
So now you have both words. They were just two translations of the same word. It's
interesting how things can evolve into.
Well, and that's what I think will make this kind of an interesting conversation tonight, because it kind of goes into culture. So the next thing that happens is around 70 AD, and this is around the time that, so the Romans and the Jewish, they weren't getting along. The Jewish were kind of rebelling, and the Romans destroyed the Jewish temple on the mount, the mountain they keep fighting over stuff on to this day.
Yep.
And and that was in retribution for their revolts. So at this point, things kind of scattered all over the place. There's just, who knows? It was Wild West, I guess, in religion. And a new offshoot started, right? Around this Jewish guy, Jesus.
Jesus. Come on now.
Okay, Jesus. And so they started describing something even more, a devious entity of the divine world, one of God's angels fallen for, envy and pride, right? So now you're starting to see the formulation of this. They collect their ideas into this New Testament of what God has said. And now you're starting to get something. Everything's changed for Satan. He's getting a part in the play.
Right.
Right? But it was a small part. In fact, they were totally disrespectful. Like halfway through the Bible, there's parts where they still talked about him like an object. He's probably a little pissed about that. I'm just an object.
Well, I don't think he has any true emotions at this point, though, right?
Well, no, this is where it's starting to form. But so the stage is set, right? So now he's like, kingdom of evil, right? But there's no backstory. What's good and evil character with no backstory? But, the book was written, right? But because of the change, the Old Testament started to get reinterpreted. So suddenly they go back, and you remember the snake in the Garden of Eden, right? Well, the snake in the Garden of Eden, per the oldest versions, was that. He was a talking snake, like for 1,000 years. But, then with the New Testament and Christianity, they kind of went back and said, oh, no. Yeah, totally. That was Satan. You didn't know?
Right. Now the snake takes on a much larger role. Right.
But basically, well, now we're kind of in the weeds on all that. But so the Old Testament, the New Testament are written, but there's no backstory. So now everything we know of the devil is what we've made up since. Religious texts, folklore, culture, pull it into the modern day, and movies and, stories. And that's where all of the identity of what Satan, the devil...
It's a great learning tool. I mean, the devil is a great learning tool. It's a great way to manipulate and create fear.
It became a way to corral people. They kind of made a perfect bucket to put all, like the old gods, right? All of the Wiccan gods or whatever, the pagan gods of the day, you just call them different Satan entities, right? And anyone that was different, it was a way to police the Christian world. Actually being like a Satanist, that took like centuries to develop. But along the way, they loved calling people Satanists. I mean, we have mass hysterias right through history. The best known example, of course, witches, black magic. Because, black magic was actually uncool long before Christians. It was the Romans that would actually cook them on the stake.
Really?
Is that the way you say that?
No, but I know what you mean. The Romans were kind of awful.
They were sick individuals.
They did a lot of really horrible things.
Right? So, it was an easy thing to see how women and Satan would be a comparison. It was kind of something in the Bible from the very beginning because, first of all, you were perceived as below because you were a rib. Second of all, well, you're the ones that ate the apple. It wasn't us.
Right. Women have been an easy target.
Right.
Always.
Right. And, along the way, then literature, a lot of this stuff has nothing to do with the Bible. It becomes literature written afterwards that starts developing the story, and just women become the gateway to Satan. So
evil women with their lustful boobies.
Right.
Something like that.
And I don't know if I would say lustful boobies, because if you look...
Dirty pillows. They're all going to laugh at you.
Not where I was going with that, but so Satan evolves as an image even through the centuries, like early images of Satan. It was just, what you imagine, horns and dude, with a tail. Mm-hmm. But if you go through the centuries, he starts growing saggy boobs and stuff.
Really?
Yes. If you look at images of Satan, you'll find a lot of them. He turns kind of feminine, but like old haggy.
I think my body is turning into that old Satan body.
I'm sure it's not, and totally not.
I have my belly, my wand belly, and my saggy boobs. It's a fear that they did that to make women fearful of aging.
No, that's it. See, this is probably where like Pond's beauty cream came from or something. So then you end up like putting the recipe together, right? So 1400s, there was Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger wrote a book called Malleus Maleficarum. Maleficarum was just old Latin for like black magic. And it was the book that gave you instructions. When everyone talks about, the whole idea if they sink, then they're virginal or whatever. If they float, they're a witch, right? Mm-hmm. Well, that's a fucked proposition.
Exactly.
But that's where that comes from. He wasn't even, a legit person. You'll find this through all of these
Couple
stories.
Of old
like all
white
these
dudes.
Yeah, totally. So you add in fear of the unknown. You've got a recipe book. You've got a pressure cooker here, right? Mm-hmm. You add an escalating feud between a couple of families. The Porters and the Putnams in Salem, Massachusetts, fighting over who gets to rule the town because they were going to split the town up. And now spice it with a couple of little girls who have little fake spaz fits and
tween drama
and love the attention that they get, and let the town boil over with mass hysteria. And what do you get?
Right.
Salem witch trials. 19 executed. 5 of them were men.
I didn't. Oh, I did. Yeah, I did know that. I didn't realize it was 5. I thought it was fewer, but wow.
Yeah, well, I mean, still 5 men, and so what does that leave? I'm shitty at math.
5 men and
14 women. But that's minuscule, and not even the first. Val Carmonica in Italy, around 1505, 1510, and then there was a second trial, like maybe 5 years after that, and each one of those trials, 60 people killed.
Eesh.
And then France.
That's the noise for being killed.
That's my noise. Yeah. In France, Affair of the Poisons. I'm not going to say however they say it in French.
Affair of the Poisons?
Yeah, Affair of the Poisons.
That.
Yeah, well, it's basically Louis XIV time in France. And it becomes this crazy murder scandal that along the way, there's supposedly a plot against Louis XIV that they're going to poison him. And they start digging into all of this stuff and finding there's this whole subculture of witches and sorcerers and all kinds of stuff. And it becomes this mass insanity where they're finding all these murder
There's
plots.
That rosemary cookie.
That's not what it is. I told you it was a bean muffin.
It was a bean muffin.
And so along the way, over a few years, 36 are executed, several kicked out of the country, and 36. Hey, nothing. Salzburg witch trials right around the same time, 1675, 139.
I would not want to be a woman back in that time. It's brutal. You have to have all these freaking kids that you don't even have a choice, really. And then you have to wash their freaking dirty clothes and take care of everything. And then, the sex wasn't good. And,
no, probably not.
And then, what a horrible time to be a woman.
Yeah, thank God we're living now. I mean, so that just became a habit that anything and everything that was not good Christian was Satanism. And the funny thing is, they just called anything that they didn't like out of the norm. Splinter groups, they called them Satanists. It became a really common term around the 1500s. And today, what we call these Satanist groups, today we call them Jews, Lutherans, Protestants,
anyone
Roman
that wasn't
Catholics.
Their version of acceptable or mainstream was
we have
Satanist.
to remember, it's a long history with the Christian religion that the Christianity generally that we know, that was just one of many sects way back 1,000 years ago. It was the sect that survived all the rest. So it was a common thing. And all of these were just unfairly persecuted variants of Christianity. They even made up fake groups, Luciferians, so that they could persecute smaller groups, like Bogomils, Waldensians. They were just groups that couldn't stand up for themselves, and that made it was propaganda so they could get away with beating them up. And so through all of this history, there was no Satanism. It didn't really exist. Sure, there might have been little tiny outliers.
It was just a way for people to bully each other.
Exactly. But unintended consequences, you start putting the idea out there in people's minds.
And then you get Judas Priest.
Yeah.
Eventually.
Anyway, so let's fast forward a little bit to the 1800s. In the 1800s, still no Satanists. But, maybe some proto-Satanists, right? We call them occultists, right? So here's where you get that blurry line. We get names like Helena Blavatsky, who was just a Russian leader of the Theosophical Society. We get Eliphas Levi, who was just another, French. The French seem to be really into this shit. Sorry.
The French and the English as well.
Yeah. Well, so you start seeing that change, and basically if Satanism was rock and roll, 18th century occultists in France and England, they were the blues that came before it, right?
That's a good analogy.
Yeah. So kind of at the turn of the century, you get a couple of names that stand out. One, a lot of people might not know, Ben Kadosh. So here's a weird thing about these occultists and Satanists too. They just can't seem to stand their own fucking names, right? Ben Kadosh.
Well, they're not sexy enough.
No, I guess not. His real name was Carl William Hansen, 1872 to 1936. He was just a Danish Freemason occultist, and he publishes a pamphlet in 1906. So now we're at the turn of the century.
Their version of a zine.
Right. Well, no, this was a one-off. This is probably where he went wrong. He was proposing Lucifer worship, but I think his failing was, well, it was a fucking pamphlet, not much advertising. So I don't think anyone.
That's a weird thing to do.
Yeah.
Like, I need a new hobby. I'm going to create a pamphlet.
Right.
To promote the worship of Lucifer. Sitting at his little wooden table in his little kitchen with his wooden spoon and
drinking his fancy little drink. I think Luciferianism should be the new order of the day.
What a weird thing to do.
So speaking of a legendary weird, now comes a name that probably a lot of us know. Aleister Crowley.
See, you say Crowley, I say Crowley. You say tomato, I say tomato.
Aleister Crowley said, "My name is Aleister Crowley, like all things unholy. That's how you can remember my name." So for him, his name is Crowley.
Well,
but
I'm still going to say Crowley.
I mean, blame Ozzy.
Crowley.
It's Ozzy's fault. I've been saying Crowley for years.
Mr. Crowley.
Bum, 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 bum. Okay. So he was a fascinating guy. Okay, so getting back to the names, that was not his name. His name was Edward Alexander Crowley. And he changed his name because he had an obsession with Irish and Scottish culture. Aleister is like a Celtification, I guess you could say, of Alexander, his middle name. That's where that comes from. He was a mountaineer. He was bisexual. He was a spy for MI6, possibly throughout his life. In fact, he knew and did some work for Ian Fleming, like James Bond, Ian Fleming.
Okay.
He was he was also a drug addict. So, and he liked sticking his thumb in the eye of, or however they say that,
thumbing his nose at
the bourgeois. It was a thing, like Oscar Wilde, and it was a thing of the time.
He was very anti-mainstream,
right? And he actually, he was kind of a dick. He was brash. He loved to kind of take charge of any situation he was in. Was in several societies, ended up kind of taking over one. The Ordo Templi Orientis, OTO, became its Grand Master.
And wasn't he also a head of the Golden Dawn? Yeah,
that was before that, but it became this fascinating moment. I think there's even a couple of books about this, that because he was just a pushy jerk, he started a fight with them. I don't remember what it's about, but he storms up the stairs and tries to start a fight with people. And there was like Yeats, the poet Yeats, I don't remember his whole name, was involved in this. I think he and Yeats might have gotten in a fucking fist fight.
Fisticuff over.
Oh yeah, that's right. I'm sorry. We're talking like 1890, so it was fisticuffs.
I challenge you. How dare you call me Crowley when I'm Crowley?
He kind of subscribed to this idea of Nietzsche and the idea of self-power and you are your own destiny. And he didn't believe in Satan at all. He was not a Satanist. He said Satans are Christians in spirit, and inferior Christians at that, because they still accept the doctrine, right? So that's how he viewed the world. But he founded a religion called Thelema. And the fundamental idea was find your true calling in life. That's the true law, true expression of love in his eyes. Maybe there's some honor in that, right? But this is a guy who kind of sympathized, I think, with Nazis. So
that's the thing, is like there's always some sort of thread of an interesting philosophy or some interesting like sort of concept through a lot of these guys, but they end up being so completely disappointing
Right.
overall because they're narcissistic or potentially racist.
Right. I mean, there seems to
There's
be
always something that's just truly disappointing.
But there's a thread of social Darwinism in a lot of what they do. I mean, think about that.
But it's so tragic, too, because I don't think they were unintelligent, obviously.
No, Aleister Crowley was, extremely bright, well educated. He just...
But I can't say, but if you're racist, then you lack intelligence, in my mind.
In a way, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so to keep the story moving forward, so Aleister Crowley, ooh, see, I almost did it.
We will win you over.
So the interesting thing, so we're talking England still, right? So he's this prime name of occultism in England. So how does this jump the pond, I guess we say these days, right? So, well, he did visit the U.S. on occasion, but we didn't have internet or fast jets. So how did it happen? Well,
UFOs.
Maybe.
No.
Oh, I don't know. I'll have to look into that. So Jack Parsons was the link. Do you remember Jack Parsons? We've talked about him before.
A little bit, but I'm not as familiar with him as Crowley.
So Jack Parsons was extremely important to the history of rocket propulsion.
Oh, right. We discussed him.
Founding member of NASA and a little bit of a Satanist.
And very eccentric.
Yeah, totally. In 1946, he tried to make a moonchild with a ceremony with his girlfriend and L. Ron Hubbard.
Right.
And when the boss heard about this, Aleister Crowley, because he was kind of running the OTO in California, when he got wind of this, his words were, and I quote, "I get fairly frantic when I contemplate the idiocy of those louts."
Louts.
I don't know if that's how he said that, but that's how I felt like it should be said.
Cracking geezers.
So yeah, Parsons at the Ordo Templi Orientis, he tries getting a little creative with his interpretation, and Crowley says, "Yeah, you're out." He excommunicates him. And yeah, he gets robbed by L. Ron Hubbard and writes a book about how he's going to be the Antichrist.
That's not a really great career plan.
Well, I mean...
Let me put this on my resume.
Yeah, my future plans are
Let me fax you my resume.
That was in 1949.
It's a terrible idea.
And apparently he just couldn't quite see the future that well because in 1952 he blows himself up in a lab.
That guy had issues.
Yeah. So at that point, he's the connection between the next stage. But we had to wait 5-10 years for the next name to pop up.
And we know who this is.
Howard Stanton Levy.
Howard.
I know. So he's born in 1930.
If he had kept the name Howard, I feel like his career path would have been much more mundane.
You think so? Probably.
Absolutely.
Howard. It's a very safe name, Howard.
Yeah, there's not a lot of Satanist leaders named Howie.
Howie Mandel.
He's not a Satanist leader.
Oh, you're right. Okay.
As far as we know.
No, he's just into making sure everything's very clean.
Oh, does he have that? OCD?
Yeah, doesn't he? Yeah, I think he does.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, Howie. I just had to say it if you're listening.
Yeah, we'll send you a pair of gloves. Some sanitizer.
You're a terrible human being.
Sorry.
It was a perfectly satanic thing to say.
Oh.
So, yeah, Howard Stanton Levy. He's born in 1930. And the family moves from Chicago to a suburb of San Francisco around 1940. And at the time, he was just your typical, quiet, introverted Jewish kid.
Good little Jewish boy in San Francisco. Did his parents owned a company or a
I don't.
Were they tailors or something like that?
I think you might be right. Yeah, I don't remember what they were.
I think that sounds familiar.
And he, just doing normal things. He learned how to play organ and keyboard, read adventure books.
And he was really talented.
Yeah, he was. I mean, not quite as talented as he starts to explode his story.
Oh.
He had a little deviant side. He liked to try and catch a peek in the girls' locker room at high school. It was at Campbell High School. Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's true. Okay, he was a total lifelong pervert.
Like if someone's like a weird little pervert early on, That's a
Maybe
big
that's
red
where
flag.
Porky's got the idea. The movie?
I doubt that.
Oh, okay.
I'm sure they had. I'm sure this was not the first guy to do
Okay, you might be
something
right.
perverted like that.
So now from here, we're talking fact right now, but here it gets totally tricky. Howard LaVey moves to San Francisco proper in 1948. He's 18 years old. He marries a 15-year-old and changes his name to Anton LaVey. And
intriguing.
Yes, and comes up with, I don't remember it now, a whole explanation of the origins of this story. It's all bullshit. None of it's true.
Well, I know that they're like, I don't know if any of like what's true and what is fiction, but like there were stories that he worked for the police department taking
False.
pictures. There's stories that he worked for the circus.
False.
And then there's stories that he played organ at like lounge clubs
Somewhat
in
true.
San Francisco. One of which was a burlesque club that supposedly Marilyn Monroe had performed at. False, right. Yeah, it's almost like every other thing about this guy is false.
It's amazing. Well, actually, I want to say this one because this one's a little weird aside that what is true is that he had a pet lion.
Oh, right. I am aware of the pet lion.
Togar.
Togar.
That's a weird name, Togar. I haven't looked up to see what that even means.
The 500-pound pet lion that slept at the foot of his bed.
Sure, in a cage. You
Right.
look at videos, it was in a cage. But neighbors did try to get rid of the lion. They
And
petitioned.
this is while he was living in San Francisco in the Black House, correct?
Right. So his parents bought a house. He always claimed that it was his house, but his parents owned this house. They did eventually kind of will
On
it over to him.
California Street.
Right. And it was just nestled in between these other houses, a Victorian house, not as old as he even claimed. It was from like turn of the century, 1900s.
Still a cool house.
Yeah, cool house. He built his own secret passageways in there and claimed that they were there before.
See, that kind of sounds like something you would do.
Yeah, I probably
If you
would.
had the
That
option,
I would totally do
You would do that.
I love secret rooms
Yeah,
and
you would
doors
do
and
that.
shit. Yeah. But he had this tiger and he ended
Lion.
up. Oh, did I say tiger? Yeah.
Tiger.
Lions and tigers, oh my.
Oh, my.
So he eventually he has to get rid of it because the lion gets a little rambunctious, tears up the house, and he has to get rid of it. And Tippi Hedren takes him and puts him in animal preserve.
Tippi Hedren, for those who might not recognize the name right away, was one of Alfred Hitchcock's like discoveries. She starred in the film The Birds, and
Right.
she's also Melanie Griffith's mom.
Right.
And she was a real big early animal advocate.
In fact, she totally regrets. I had to look this up and study the pictures because there's pictures of her and her daughter Melanie hanging out around the pool and shit with this lion.
They literally did
But it's
have
not the
lions
same
living.
lion.
No, that lion Togar did live on their property, and it did become an animal that was in films.
Yeah.
It was in several films, but they did live with other domesticated, however domesticated you can have a lion. But they did live with lions. They did a Life,
know what the
a
lion
Life
they did
magazine
have?
spread with them with their lions swimming in the pool, sleeping in Melanie's bedroom, and
Yeah, you know what that lion's name was?
the lion that lived
That
with
actually
them.
stayed there? Neil.
Neil.
Neil the lion.
Aw,
I know, that's a
kinda
perfect
cute.
name. I like that.
better than
Neil.
Todd.
Todd is a terrible name
Todd
for
the lion.
anything, let alone a lion. So anyway, Anton LaVey is also a truth about him. He is the father of modern contemporary satanic religious groups, like organized religion. And that's what we've been saying before, that it didn't really exist. Lots of people were called Satanism, but this is the first time you had a group that you could say, there you go, there's a Satanist.
Like the Church of Satan.
The Church of Satan. So how this starts is he was really into film. He had like encyclopedic knowledge of old movies, and he makes friends with somebody named Kenneth Anger. You know Kenneth Anger.
Kenneth Anger of Hollywood Babylon fame, and he was involved in a lot of sort of cult movies in the 1960s, and he was like a Hollywood sort of gossip reporter, right?
Yeah, well, I don't know if he was a reporter, but he definitely wrote all those Babylon books.
Yeah.
And he made all kinds of weird...
Produced cult B movies, yeah.
I don't even know. They were art films more than anything. Yeah, they were
films, yeah.
very strange films. I mean, you can find plenty of them
He's a
on
character.
YouTube. In fact, Anton, he had a fascination with the devil and stuff like that, and, like a cursory idea of what that was. But he was into politics. That's what he was interested in, like Ayn Rand and stuff like that, and Nietzsche. But Kenneth was the one that taught him about Aleister Crowley, who introduced him to who this guy was, Jack Parsons, who had written this book about, I'm the Antichrist, just wait and see. Mm-hmm. So that's how Anton discovers. He didn't know fuck all about Satanism or the occult, really, at any level.
He was kind of looking for a new act, basically.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Yeah.
So there wasn't really a specific point when things got started. The church likes to claim April 30th, 1966, but it wasn't like a defined thing. Just somewhere along the way, he'd already dumped his old wife and found a new one, Diane Hegarty. And she suggested, what go well with this is shave your head, because they were doing, since 1961, these magic circle groups where they would lecture on this stuff. And
oh, right. That's how he sort of became known around San Francisco and famous for his paranormal activities. Like he was kind of like this psychic and in the 1960s, people really had an open mind, and he had this. Times
were a changing.
Yeah, he was kind of like a local celebrity for his paranormal groups.
Right, and he would give these lectures, and Kenneth Anger was there. I mean, pretty much behind the scenes, Kenneth Anger was probably the more knowledgeable one in putting the information into his head. I mean, Anton was not a dumb person, so I'm sure he knew plenty. He was well read.
San Francisco in the 1960s was.
It was a crazy time.
A lot going on.
Hell yeah. So they basically, there's a PR guy, I don't remember his name, but one of the guys showing up worked in PR and said, what you should do is you should kind of make this like a church, right? Because that just sounds better when it's not just these little circles, it's a church.
Right.
So you kind of put it all together. And then Kenneth Anger, well, he worked in media and he had a few connections. So they told the press, local socialites, and called year 1966 year one of Satan. So with Kenneth Anger standing next to him, they start this church, and, LaVey is just the perfect showman and starts dressing in these ridiculous costumes and inviting, celebrities.
He would reach out to a lot of celebrities, and a lot of these celebrities too were in, like, it made headlines. So there was a lot of publicity involved, and he had conducted a wedding, a satanic ritual wedding, whatever, in his home for this socialite couple, and that made a lot of big headlines. And that, I think, was kind of really the introduction to him, like moving beyond just San Francisco headlines to national headlines.
Well, and then if anyone's curious about one of his nicknames, the Black Pope, where that started is just after that wedding, he also did a funeral for a soldier. And that pissed off a few Christians, and they kind of took to the streets or whatever and protest, and that just kind of earned him the nickname. I don't know if it was the news media or them.
I'm not sure, but it seemed like a title he sort of enjoyed and liked to play with.
Totally. So, so things are kicking off, and what better way to get things kicked off if you've got a few celebrities showing up at the door? And I think,
Sure. And who better that could sort of...
A blonde bombshell. He
kind of met his match when he met Jane Mansfield. There's different stories about how they met. What the ongoing story is that she met him at an after-hours party at the Black House. But who knows? It could have been prearranged. I don't know. There's no real source on that. But once they met, they did this publicity photo stunt shoot together and clicked a little bit. But this was a complicated time in Jane's life. Jane Mansfield was a blonde bombshell. She was kind of the other Marilyn Monroe. But
much more stacked Marilyn Monroe.
More stacked and much more of a publicity hound, whereas Marilyn liked to kind of hide out and not go after all of that attention. Jane loved every minute of any attention she could possibly get and would often stage her own photo shoots anywhere and everywhere. She would stage photo shoots and call the paparazzi, and she craved attention. If Jane had an addiction, it was attention. And she staged a photo shoot with Anton LaVey, and But they sort of developed a relationship after that, and we don't know to what degree. But because this time in her life was so difficult, she was dating her married attorney, Sam Brody, and fighting for custody of her 5th child with her 3rd husband when she met Anton. And then later that year, when Zoltan was mauled by a lion at this jungle zoo, she was there for Jungle Land. She was there for a photo shoot, and Zoltan sort of wandered off, and he was mauled sadly by a lion, but he did survive. She turned to LaVey for help and as sort of an emotional support.
Which he still had his lion at the time, so that seems odd.
There's a lot of lions going on. So, but because he told her that he went to the top of a mountain and did some kind of a ritual to request the healing for Zoltan, and the next day he sort of had this miraculous turnaround in his recovery. And at that point, Jane, who had so much going on and was so overwhelmed, really kind of started to believe, I think, in Anton.
She didn't want to believe in the doctors who had performed surgeries.
Right. He did have to have a brain surgery, sure. But I think she was in a sort of a desperate situation herself and was really willing to take any help she could get.
She was using a lot of drugs and stuff at the time, right? She was off the rails.
She was not in a healthy place. Yeah, she wasn't in a healthy place. And so as she grew closer that year to Anton, and she was still with Brody, the lawyer. And when you look at pictures of this era, it's kind of like, I mean, both of these guys are kind of skis-balls, but they hated each other. They really, really hated each other. And Anton told her several times that Brody was going to die in a car accident.
The curse.
So there's the alleged curse. What's interesting to me is that he was actually in, I think, like 5 or 6 car accidents leading up to the fatal car accident with Jane.
See, then I put this on Jane because, Jesus Christ, stop getting in the car with a guy.
I don't know why anyone would get in the car with this guy at this point. I mean, seriously, that year he had like 5 or 6 car accidents.
Did he really have that many accidents?
Yes, the guy could not drive. I don't know if he was just driving drunk or I don't know. But the guy had a lot of car accidents. But he had warned her, and maybe just even as a friend warning her, like,
yeah, maybe that was what it was.
Don't ride with this guy anymore.
Into some other thing.
Right. So sadly, she was doing filling in for Mamie Van Doren in Louisiana, doing a dinner theater gig
in New Orleans.
I was in Louisiana. I don't know if it was in New Orleans. It was somewhere not outside of New Orleans, but. And they were driving there, and she had 3 of her children in the car and 2 chihuahuas, and they were in a fatal car accident. All of the children survived, amazingly.
And her head rolled down the street.
No, she was not decapitated, much like the myth goes.
Right.
Nearly decapitated. What's interesting, too, is that vehicles after that, that type of vehicle, they call it the Mansfield bar because they did install a safety feature in these convertibles to avoid this situation. I don't know a whole lot about that. But anyways, Zoltan grew up after his lion mauling and surviving all of this to become an actor himself.
Oh, he wasn't. I know that.
Yeah, he
Mariska is, but
yeah, and Mariska Hargitay, yeah, she's famous as well. So yeah, the children all survived fine.
That's insane. So like they were sleeping on the floorboards or something,
they were sleeping in
right?
like the back seat or something
insanity.
Like that.
I mean, they were
crazy.
pretty fucked up though. They were definitely in the hospital from this.
But not injured, severely. Like Jane and Sam both were deceased.
And I guess
and a chihuahua.
And there was also a chauffeur. They weren't driving. I always thought it was just the 2 of them.
Oh, right.
But there was a chauffeur, some 19-year-old kid that was driving.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
What a crazy situation.
Man, oh man. So
I was just going to say though too, there's other rumored celebrities that follow. There's always been rumored celebrities that followed Anton LaVey.
So Sammy Davis Jr., that was one. In fact, so get this. In 1973, Sammy was in a movie called Poor Devil, and it was with Christopher Lee. And Christopher Lee talks about this, that he played the devil. And Anton sends Lee an autographed book of his, and in it he wrote to Christopher Lee, "A fine actor and a perfect devil." But he must have liked Sammy Davis Jr. a little bit more, because he gave him an honorary second-degree Church of Satan membership.
Yeah, that was kind of one of his shticks, to try to entice celebrities into his Church of Satan.
Yeah.
He also did that with Liberace. Liberace is an unconfirmed member. I'm not really sure. It could have been one of those same situations where he received an honorary degree. And
I like that, though. I prefer to believe that it was true.
I've read that they were friends or friendly, so I'm not exactly sure. Also, Mark Allman, which is not a household name, but you might know him from the band Soft Cell.
Oh, I love that. Okay.
With the song Tainted Love.
Yeah.
It's a really famous song. And it's a kind of a funny story, because he said he was actually really curious about it, and, I have an open mind and curious. So he actually showed up at the induction ritual, which took place in a sort of middle of nowhere forest, and they were going through this whole induction process, and he's quoted as saying, "It freaked me out," and I'm paraphrasing a bit, but the hairs on his back of his neck stood up, and he became quite frightened.
Really?
Right. Yeah. So even though he thought, "Oh, I'll play along with this,"
we're talking about Anton LaVey wearing goofy outfits with horns, and
yeah, but there was an actual ritual that took place to induct him into the church, and poor Mark thought, "Well, I'll go along with this publicity stunt," and then he became quite frightened.
Oh.
Rightly so. It sounds a little freaky.
Yeah, tainted his love.
Tainted his love, right.
So I guess we should probably talk a little bit about, the philosophy and everything, because, yeah, he created the church, but what he ends up being more known for is the Bible. Right? And I don't mean the New Testament.
The Satanic Bible.
Right. So 1968 or so, they start forming rituals around their stuff that they do, right? And it comes from a lot of older stuff. There's always a woman, naked on the altar, right? And they do weird, naughty things. And so he writes this Bible, and well, okay, wrote is maybe a loose term. Mm-hmm. Wasn't even his idea. So basically, the publisher of Avon Books wanted to cash in, because there was a movie that had recently come out called Rosemary's Baby. And Rosemary's Baby makes a mention of Anton LaVey, because it mentions the year one of Satan. So, there you go. Cash in on it. Of course, Anton LaVey loves to stretch the story and change things. He was not the fucking devil. They know who the devil was. He's on the script list of who's yeah, he's not the devil. But that's an opportunity. You know what? You should write a book. So he does. He starts pulling together all of his information, all kinds of occult books, mystical texts, and he just kind of cobbles it together. A lot of this wasn't really his writing. I mean, he did the foreword and pulled a lot of this in and passed it off as his own, kind of wrote it in the format of the Bible, because what he was trying to do is write the anti-Bible.
Right.
Because a lot of what he was doing in his beliefs he was an atheist. He didn't actually believe in Satan.
See, and I kind of feel like he was more, and this is splitting hairs, but I feel like he was kind of more of an agnostic, because he is quoted as saying he believes in God.
Yeah, I mean, but then there's also times he has been quoted saying flat out, "I'm an atheist. The devil is just, I just use it as a symbolism for an idea, right?
A vehicle.
Right, a vehicle to convey his idea of, Nietzsche and Ayn Rand. He loved Ayn Rand. He's basically said, quote, the Satanic Bible is Ayn Rand with trappings, with, ceremony thrown in, right? So when I say copy, I mean copy.
He plagiarized.
He straight out plagiarized some sections. Now he did write credits. I dedicate this or whatever. I forget what it says to some of the names, but so he pulls together a lot of these occult books, mystical texts, and one of the most glaring examples is an Australian book called "Might is Right," and he took wholesale sections of this. Now, he edited a little bit because remember he was a Jewish kid from what was it, Ohio or something like that? I forget.
He was from Illinois.
Illinois, yeah. So he's a Jewish kid from Illinois. So he took out the anti-Semitic parts of the book because Might is Right is just an offensive book. Side note: it was actually very tongue-in-cheek. It was a satirical work, but sometimes when you're that vile, people are going to catch that it's a joke in some way.
That's a bad joke.
Yeah, it's a terrible joke. But that was one of the huge influences in what he wrote, so much that he stole straight from it. He stole from Aleister Crowley, his famous book, The Equinox, just changing the Christian references to Satan references. And he even, the one interesting thing in his Satanic Bible, it says, it's straight up and says, here you will find truth and fantasy. One is necessary for the other to exist. And his view, if he were to boil it down, is that things most important to everyone, the things you can have in life, are sex, money, power. You probably don't have enough of any of those, right?
He sounds like an 80s stockbroker.
Well, he probably would have been if he hadn't found this path.
I think you're right.
And, Christian society wants you to believe that those three things are morally bad. So his reason for incorporating and balancing or pulling the idea of the devil was exactly as a counterpoint. It became known as rationalist Satanism.
Rationalist Satanism.
Right. But in all of the ceremony, maybe people say, well, what about the ceremony? It was psychodrama. It was enacting out things to help people. I don't know. Maybe it was escapism or something.
Mm-hmm. There's so much contradiction in all of this to me.
You find videos and if you're an open mind, you might waffle. We did it. We watched a interview with him the other night and we kind of went back and forth like, I don't know, this guy's actually making kind of some sense. But he's also, I
think he was ahead of his time.
But also a self-involved prick.
I agree. I think he was ahead of his time and his lack of empathy and his full-on narcissism and ego was a downfall, but the concept of anti-establishment and
fits right into the 60s.
Deconstructing the mainstream, I can understand.
Yeah, but it was all fun and love and weirdness and sex and freakiness until some Charles guy kind of ruined the reputation. So and this is about the same time that he's released the first edition of the Satanic Bible, 1969. Not me, a different Charles, Mr. Manson.
Mr. Manson.
Mr. Manson.
Please.
And so Anton's unfortunate choice that kind of screwed him on this is his love for attention. And he did like some topless witches Sabbath thing.
Which included Susan Atkins,
right.
one of Manson's followers.
Acolytes, minions, or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even just there. There was another guy, and I'm not remembering his name. It's like a French-sounding name that I just couldn't even pronounce properly anyway. But one of the other murderers was in one of Kenneth Anger's movies.
San Francisco was a bit of a
incestuous
small community.
Culture
it wasn't a
creativity.
Right. And a lot of these people did sort of, I guess incestuous maybe is the word, but everyone sort of was jumping from new sort of like cult to new cult.
Right.
Cult hoppers.
Right. Well, I mean, even Manson himself did a little cult hopping here because he was not satanic.
No.
He took opportunity. This is after he's in prison and starts interacting with an organization called the Process Church of the Final Judgment. And he starts kind of like spewing their nonsense, which ends up making the Process Church reviled as, the evil cult of the world of the moment, right? You combine this all together, and man, that became a shitty day to be in the Church of Satan. On top of that, there's just this culture thing happening. So he has a publicity nightmare, but at the same time, it's pervasive in culture.
Absolutely. There's at that time, you can look at the movies. Movies are a really good demonstration historically of where we're at, what's happening in our society. And at this time, from the 1960s, starting in the early 1960s through the 1970s, there is an obsession with all things occult, black magic, Satanism, and witches. I'm going to give you a few. These are just a few titles. Okay, we have The Witch's Curse, Blood Orgy of the She-Devils.
Oh, I love these titles.
Where there's actually no orgy that happens, so don't get too excited.
Oh, damn.
The Naked Witch, The Devil's Reign, Race with the Devil, which stars Peter Fonda. Kind of interesting.
Okay, yeah.
This was after Easy Rider.
I think we watched a bit of that one night.
Could be,
It
yeah.
looks terrible. But, I mean, Peter Fonda's awesome.
Peter Fonda is awesome. That's actually not a horrible movie.
Oh, no? Okay.
Blood on Satan's Claw, Devil's Kiss, Enter the Devil, Satan's Cheerleaders, Black Sabbath.
There you go, Black Sabbath.
Black Sabbath.
Yeah. Movie guys, not the band. They hadn't.
Right. They got their name from this movie. The Demon Lover, Simon, King of the Witches.
What?
Which is actually said to display very true occult practices in this movie. It's one of the few that is...
What's it called again?
It's called Simon, King of the Witches. And this one, I don't know how or who they consulted, but it's said to have displayed the most accurate rituals in this movie.
Interesting.
Yeah. Burn, Witch, Burn. The Omen, which we're all familiar with, The Omen.
Right.
The Devil's Reign. And this one is really interesting because it stars one of your favorite guys, Ernest Borgnine.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And he plays the cult leader villain. And guess who is the white knight that sort of fights him? You'll never guess. William Shatner.
Oh, my. Oh, this was in Shatner's like B-movie era, right?
So,
okay.
and also, John Travolta makes his film debut. And our guy that we've been talking about all night, Anton LaVey. This is one of the few films where he actually makes an appearance. He shows up in the film doing an actual ritual.
Okay.
So this is a really sort of, if you follow this B-cult movie genre, this specific genre, which is, there's not a lot written about it, but if you follow this genre, this is one of the most important films.
Oh, I feel sad. You left one out that I
I'm
like.
not done.
Oh, you're not done. Okay.
Rosemary's Baby.
Oh, okay.
And The Exorcist. But I've only named a few. There's literally hundreds.
Oh, yeah, like The Car.
The Car.
The
right.
Car. So my theory is, I'm sorry, Stephen King. You're awesome. Your books are a little long. But Christine, I'm pretty sure you got your whole idea for Christine from that movie, The Car, with James Brolin.
Yeah, it's and that's actually a famous film from that time. So, yeah, people were pretty much obsessed because, like I said, these are only a few of the films. There are hundreds.
Do you have a favorite?
I lean toward Rosemary's Baby and The Exorcist.
The original of, these are...
Yeah, I mean, they're like the best, really, but they're all worthy of watching, but not necessarily of value. Not necessarily cinematic masterpieces, but I love B-cult genre movies anyway, so
Yeah.
they're all fun.
So, the thing is time rolls on and, huppies. Maybe that's what we should call them now.
Yeah, instead of hipsters or yuppies, they're huppies.
Huppies. So, yeah, the hippies turn into yuppies, and now they're like fearing for the kids, right? And
Full of regrets.
totally full of regrets. Well, I don't know. Maybe all their ideas of the 60s or philosophical ideas of the 60s, they didn't pan out
Don't
or
be
something.
little Satanists like we were.
right? So kind of around this time, like 1972, there's a book that gets published called The Satan Cellar. It's by Mike Warnke. And it's kind of like this first little thing that starts off a little bit of a scare because he claims to be a recovered Satanist. I don't know. Maybe is there like a AA, like a SA, Satanics Anonymous?
Probably in the 70s or 80s. Oh, the 80s, I'm sure there was one on every corner in the 80s based on how many satanic movies there were. They didn't have pornography. They had more Satanist films than porn.
Oh, there you go.
Seriously. It's really bizarre.
So Mike Warnke claims that he's recovered and, he interacted with Anton LaVey and Charles Manson. Total bullshit. He's totally outed later as a total scam. But this becomes that first wave of, these satanic survivors and ex-Satanists, right? But then the next stage, so there's 3 stages of shit hitting the fan. The second stage is a 1980 book called Michelle Remembers. So a therapist, this is in Canada, Lawrence Pasder. I kind of can't get over that name, Pasder. Pasder Spencer.
There we go. There's our Pez dispenser.
Yes, there's a Anton LaVey Pez dispenser. I am on a mission to get one.
I want one.
No,
we need one for our podcast booth.
Totally, we need one. Okay. All right, anyway, sorry. Lawrence Pasder, he takes in a patient and he's recording interviews with her. Her name's Michelle Smith. And he starts going down this bizarre road of pulling out supposedly repressed memories of satanic abuse that she suffered when she was a little kid. But the first problem with trusting anything that he's saying is the fact that he leaves his wife for her. For his patient.
Yeah, that's unethical.
Yeah.
To say the least.
Yeah. So, and he starts pulling into these ideas that get in people's heads of satanic ritual sacrifice and, for children and stuff. And of course, snuff films, drug cartels, kiddie porn, just the works.
Yeah.
And things start getting kind of riled up and you start hearing people making accusations in preschools and stuff. And then the one that blows it up, stage 3 of the start of the new Salem witch madness, is a troubled mother at McMartin Preschool in California. So 1983, Manhattan Beach, California. Judy Johnson is mentally ill and she has paranoid schizophrenia. She makes a claim that her son was sodomized by her estranged husband, and a teacher at the preschool, Ray Bucky. That's a serious accusation, but her claims then get a little more wacky bestiality.
So creepy.
Then she starts claiming that the teacher was flying around in the air. So the cops don't charge Ray because, there's no evidence, right? But then they do something moronic. They send a letter to 200 parents of all the kids that went to the school saying that they were conducting an investigation, yada, yada. Please ask your child if he saw a crime, if your kid saw a crime or was a victim. Possible criminal acts, oral sex, fondling of genitals, buttocks, chest area, sodomy, possibly committed under the pretense of taking the child's temperature, photos of kids without clothes, blah, blah, blah. They name Ray Bucky several times in the letter as a possible person. Tell me, could a parent have made it through that letter without freaking the fuck out? So in the blink of an eye, 400 kids are pulled in for interviews at a place called the Children's Institute that's run by Kee McFarlane. And Kee McFarlane, she calls herself a psychotherapist, but she doesn't have a professional license. She studied art and social work, right? And her technique is to ask leading questions of these kids, 400 kids, over and over, and use, suggestions to help them along.
Help them remember things that
never happened. So, of course, out of 400 kids, 360 said, yeah, I was abused. To sort out the confusion of all of this, they brought in a professional, Pasder, the fraud that wrote Michelle knows. So a main contributor to the panic is now their resource.
Right. This is ridiculous.
So it explodes from there. And then in the middle of all this, the mother that started it all, suffering paranoid schizophrenia, well, they're trying to do pre-trial and find her to discuss, her mental disability. Well, they can't do that because she's found dead. Her liver gave out from years of alcohol abuse, so she's dead. But they continue the trial. It became the most expensive trial in California history at the time. And then they were found innocent, but that didn't stop 100 other preschools across the nation getting accused of similar craziness. Up until 2015, there were people in prison still before they were exonerated.
It was a witch trial. It was a witch hunt.
Yeah, it was a total witch trial. Eventually through the 90s into the early 90s, it started petering out. Of course, this dies down, but it's also bleeding over into pop culture. I remember when I was a kid, suddenly I was a Satanist because I liked playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Well, right. And then the tipper sticker.
The tipper sticker.
The tipper sticker. So there was something called the Parents Music Resource Center, the PMRC. Mm-hmm. It was a committee formed in 1985 with a stated goal of they wanted to increase parental control over what children listen to, basically. They wanted to put labels on albums and CDs to warn parents
they didn't Twisted Sister.
Of the content. So the PMRC was founded by 4 women known as the Washington Wives. They all had connections. There was Tipper Gore, who was the wife of, at the time, Senator Al Gore, who went on to become Vice President Al Gore. And then there was Susan Baker, the wife of Treasury Secretary James Baker. Pam Hauer, the wife of a realtor, and Sally Nevius, wife of a former city council chairman. And they went on to try to shut down and basically demand that record labels add these warning labels. On September of 1985, the Senate agreed to hold a hearing. So representatives of the PMRC and 3 musicians, Dee Snider, Frank Zappa, and John Denver, and Senators Paul Hawkins and Al Gore testified before the Senate Congress. And they wanted to discuss and come to an agreement on the subject of content and what is sexually exploitive, what is offensive, and where do our civil liberties lie. So basically, Frank Zappa became kind of like the leader of this group. And even though Frank Zappa was really famous for his own sort of eccentric music and his eccentric lifestyle, but he was very well spoken. At the end of the meeting, he felt that there was ulterior motives behind all of this.
Oh, what did he say?
He said that the PMRC proposal is an ill-conceived piece of nonsense which fails to deliver any real benefits to children, infringes the civil liberties of people who are not children, and promises to keep the courts busy for years dealing with the interpretation and enforcement problems inherent in the proposal's design. He went on to state that his suspicion that the hearings were a front for H.R. 2911, a proposed blank tape tax. The major record labels need to have H.R. 2911 whiz through a few committees before anybody smells a rat. One of them is chaired by Senator Thurmond. It is a coincidence that Mrs. Thurmond is affiliated with the PMRC. Zappa had earlier stated about the Senate's agreement to hold a hearing on the matter, and he said, a couple of blowjobs here and there, and bingo, you get a hearing.
Wow. Oh, wait, no, someone was giving Strom Thurmond a blowjob?
Mrs. Thurmond.
He was like 129 at this time.
I just love that Frank Zappa throws blowjobs into this whole conspiracy. Love it. But John Denver stated that he was strongly opposed to the censorship. I guess the women on this committee thought that John Denver would be on their side.
Right.
And they were pretty much
He was a nice
shocked.
guy. I mean, he was on Sesame Street.
Right. He was this sort of soft-hearted folk songwriter, but he went on to say that in his experience, censors often misinterpret music, as was the case with his song Rocky Mountain High. In addition, Denver expressed his belief that censorship is counterproductive.
So
that which is denied becomes that which is most desired, and that which is hidden becomes that which is most interesting. Consequently, a great deal of time and energy is spent trying to get at what is being kept away from you.
And that, I would say, is exactly what happened, because when you went to the store and saw a sticker that said, you shouldn't buy this if you're a kid.
Right, the NC-17 rating
Right.
or whatever on Two Live Crew.
Parental advisory.
That's why I bought Two Live Crew.
Yeah, parental advisory, explicit lyrics. I'm in.
Exactly. It was a really bizarre, the whole thing was bizarre. So the PMRC, they had this, what they deemed the Filthy 15.
Ooh, oh wait, was John Denver on this list?
No, but I'm not going to go through all of the Filthy 15. But we will list them on our website, bloodyshed.com. So if you want to look at this entire list, it's hilarious.
But give us the highlights.
So I have my favorite, but Black Sabbath does make the list.
Oh,
But
okay.
I want you to guess.
Oh.
Because they label it. So they had specific labels.
What?
There's sex, violence, masturbation, or occult are just some of the labels they would give. Why do you think Black Sabbath was on the list?
Okay, I'll go with occult.
No. They were on the list for drug and alcohol use.
Okay.
because of their song Trashed.
Huh.
And my favorite, though, is Cyndi Lauper's on the list for her song She Bop.
Okay, sex.
Masturbation.
Oh, duh, yeah, because she go down and bop.
What is wrong with these women? It never
They
would have
don't
occurred.
bop.
I thought the song was about dancing.
Well, I did think that Rocky Mountain High was about getting...
I didn't. I thought it was about mountains. See, that's the thing. Like, these women were reading so much more into these songs than anyone would have thought of. But it's a hilarious list. But do you know who did make the list for being a cult?
Ooh, who?
Well, there's two bands, and I'm not familiar with them.
Oh, okay.
There's a band called Venom.
I've heard of them. I think they became known because of this.
Probably.
And I don't think they were known much since then either. They were just a heavy metal band.
I do want to check the song out after this. And we're probably, as soon as we play it, we'll probably go, oh, yeah, I've heard that. But so they had a song called Possessed. And then there's Merciful Fate.
I've heard of them too, yeah.
And they had a song called Into the Coven.
Ooh.
So they were the only two bands that made the Filthy 15 list for being a cult.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, and Prince is on there. And
okay, that makes sense. Actually, you know what? I think I vaguely remember that's how it all started. I think that Tipper's daughter brought home a Prince album, right? And she freaked when she heard the song or something like that.
That could be true.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the list is hilarious. And like I said, we'll have it on our website. Take a look at it. Give us your thoughts. But the PMRC was shut down in the mid to late 90s.
Yeah, see, it's around the same time that the whole Satanic Panic just kind of
went away.
Died out. So, I mean...
Thank you, grunge. There was no sex. There was no occult. It was just self-loathing. There's no label for that.
So the interesting thing, so I mean, like full circle, like those taped interviews of all the kids, they're now used in lectures in law enforcement showing how not to interview a kid. Dee Snider has a radio show, or did. Wicca is normal. Anton LaVey is kind of tame. And I mean, all is right in the world of mass hysteria, right? Right?
Well, no. There's always something around the corner.
Oh, yeah, because we have the internet now. It's going to go like wildfire, right? Yeah, no, that's the sound for killing. So, do you have a personal like memory for yourself of
my own personal Satanic Panic moment?
Yes.
No, not really, because I grew up with pretty open-minded parents, and see, I guess if you understand theater and art, and if you remove the idea that it's not a lifestyle, that it's actually just theater and art and a representation of ideas, you can intelligently navigate.
Well, what I think is funny about all of it is, I mean, doesn't this seem like a really bizarre contradiction in terms? Like Aleister Crowley and Anton LaVey are, I did it, God damn it, Aleister Crowley.
It's not going to happen. Just give it up.
And Anton LaVey, we're talking about like self-indulgence, right? Meanwhile, we get to the 80s and everyone's up and armed. It's the Reagan era. The religious right has kind of taken over.
This is when...
But it was the 80s. It was like all about excess in the 80s.
It was definitely excess. But and also remember, this is when the televangelists were blindly stealing from people. These are the people you're supposed to trust, that are supposed to be the saviors and the Christian morale.
Right.
And they're the ones that were stealing from everyone.
Right.
So everything's a contradiction. Everything's a contradiction.
All of these people that were accusing, damn near all of them turned out to be frauds or discredited in 100 ways.
Absolutely. Trust art.
Trust art. There
trust
you go.
Art. Just trust art.
I mean, we wouldn't be able to enjoy this podcast cussing like sailors and talking about crazy topics if it wasn't for Frank Zappa saying that a blowjob and...
Sure, saying that a blowjob. We'll just leave it at that. And thank you for listening to Bloody Shed Lounge.
We're leaving it on that?
We're leaving it on that. It sounds perfect.
Okay. All right. Thank y'all.